This is a continuation of The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, comprising chapters 9 through 11. Chapter 9. The youth fell back in the procession until the tattered soldier was not in sight. Then he started to walk on with the others. But he was amid wounds. The mob of men was bleeding. Because of the tattered soldier's question, he now felt that his shame could be viewed. He was continually casting sidelong glances to see if the men were contemplating the letters of guilt he felt burned into his brow. At times, he regarded the wounded soldiers in an envious way. He conceived persons with torn bodies to be peculiarly happy. He wished that he, too, had a wound, a red badge of courage. The spectral soldier was at his side like a stalking reproach. The man's eyes were still fixed in a stare into the unknown. His gray, appalling face had attracted attention in the crowd, and men, slowing to his dreary pace, were walking with him. They were discussing his plight, questioning him and giving him advice. In a dogged way, he repelled them, signing to them to go on and leave him alone. The shadows of his face were deepening, and his tight lips seemed holding in check the moan of great despair. There could be seen a certain stiffness in the movements of his body, as if he were taking infinite care not to arouse the passion of his wounds. As he went on, he seemed always looking for a place, like one who goes to choose a grave. Something in the gesture of the man as he waved the bloody and pitying soldiers away made the youth start as if bitten. He yelled in horror. Tottering forward, he laid a quivering hand upon the man's arm. As the latter slowly turned his wax-like features toward him, the youth screamed, "God! Jim Conklin?" The tall soldier made a little commonplace smile. "Hello, Henry," he said. The youth swayed on his legs and glared strangely. He stuttered and stammered. "Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim!" The tall soldier held out his gory hand. There was a curious red and black combination of new blood and old blood upon it. "Where you been, Henry?" he asked. He continued in a monotonous voice. "I thought mebbe ye got keeled over. There been thunder to pay today. I was worrying about it a good deal." The youth still lamented. "Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim!" "You know," said the tall soldier, "I was out there." He made a careful gesture. "And Lord, what a circus! And bejiminy, I got shot. I got shot. Yes, bejiminy, I got shot." He reiterated this fact in a bewildered way, as if he did not know how it came about. The youth put forth anxious arms to assist him, but the tall soldier went firmly as if propelled. Since the youth's arrival as a guardian for his friend, the other wounded men had ceased to display much interest. They occupied themselves again in dragging their own tragedies toward the rear. Suddenly, as the two friends marched on, the tall soldier seemed to be overcome by a tremor. His face turned to a semblance of gray paste. He clutched the youth's arm and looked all about him, as if dreading to be overheard. Then he began to speak in a shaking whisper. "I tell you what I'm 'fraid of, Henry. I'll tell you what I'm 'fraid of. I'm 'fraid I'll fall down, and them them damned artillery wagons, they like as not'll run over me. That's what I'm 'fraid of." The youth cried out to him hysterically. "I'll take care of you, Jim. I'll take care of ye. I swear to God I will." "Sure, will you, Henry?" the tall soldier beseeched. Yes, I tell you. I'll take care of you, Jim," protested the youth. He could not speak accurately because of the gulpings in his throat. But the tall soldier continued to beg in a lowly way. He now hung babe-like to the youth's arm. His eyes rolled in the wildness of his terror. "I was allus a good friend to ye, wa'n't I, Henry? I've allus been a pretty good feller, ain't I? And it ain't much to ask, is it? Just to pull me along out of the road? I'd do it for you, wouldn't I, Henry?" He paused in piteous anxiety to await his friend's reply. The youth had reached an anguish where the sobs scorched him. He strove to express his loyalty, but he could only make fantastic gestures. However, the tall soldier seemed suddenly to forget all those fears. He became again the grim, stalking specter of a soldier. He went stonily forward. The youth wished his friend to lean upon him, but the other always shook his head and strangely protested. "No, no, no, leave me be, leave me be." His look was fixed again upon the unknown. He moved with mysterious purpose, and all of the youth's offers he brushed aside. "No, no, leave me be, leave me be." The youth had to follow. Presently, the latter heard a voice talking softly near his shoulder. Turning, he saw that it belonged to the tattered soldier. "You'd better take him out of the road, partner. There's a battery comin' hellity hoop down the road and he'll get runned over. He's a goner anyhow in about 5 minutes. Ye can see that. You'd better take him out of the road. Where the blazes does he get his strength from?" "Lord knows," cried the youth. He was shaking his hands helplessly. He ran forward presently and grasped the tall soldier by the arm. "Jim, Jim," he coaxed, "come with me." The tall soldier weakly tried to wrench himself free. "Huh," he said vacantly. He stared at the youth for a moment. At last he spoke as if dimly comprehending. "Oh, into the fields? Oh." He started blindly through the grass. The youth turned once to look at the lashing riders and jouncing guns of the battery. He was startled from this view by a shrill outcry from the tattered man. "God, he's runnin'." Turning his head swiftly, the youth saw his friend running in a staggering and stumbling way toward a little clump of bushes. His heart seemed to wrench itself almost free from his body at this sight. He made a noise of pain. He and the tattered man began a pursuit. There was a singular race. When he overtook the tall soldier, he began to plead with all the words he could find. "Jim, Jim, what are you doing? What makes you do this way? You'll hurt yourself." The same purpose was in the tall soldier's face. He protested in a dulled way, keeping his eyes fastened on the mystic place of his intentions. "No, no, don't tech me. Leave me be. Leave me be." The youth, aghast and filled with wonder at the tall soldier, began quaveringly to question him. "Where you going, Jim? What you thinking about? Where you going? Tell me, won't you, Jim?" The tall soldier faced about as upon relentless pursuers. In his eyes there was a great appeal. "Leave me be, can't ye? Leave me be for a minute." The youth recoiled. "Why, Jim," he said in a dazed way, "what's the matter with you?" The tall soldier turned and, lurching dangerously, went on. The youth and the tattered soldier followed, sneaking as if whipped, feeling unable to face the stricken man if he should again confront them. They began to have thoughts of a solemn ceremony. There was something rite-like in these movements of the doomed soldier, and there was a resemblance in him to a devotee of a mad religion, blood-sucking, muscle-wrenching, bone-crushing. They were awed and afraid. They hung back lest he have at command a dreadful weapon. At last, they saw him stop and stand motionless. Hastening up, they perceived that his face wore an expression telling that he had at last found the place for which he had struggled. His spare figure was erect. His bloody hands were quietly at his side. He was waiting with patience for something that he had come to meet. He was at the rendezvous. They paused and stood, expectant. There was a silence. Finally, the chest of the doomed soldier began to heave with a strained motion. It increased in violence until it was as if an animal was within and was kicking and tumbling furiously to be free. This spectacle of gradual strangulation made the youth writhe, and once, as his friend rolled his eyes, he saw something in them that made him sink wailing to the ground. He raised his voice in a last supreme call. "Jim, Jim, Jim." The tall soldier opened his lips and spoke. He made a gesture. "Leave me be. Don't tech me. Leave me be." There was another silence while he waited. Suddenly, his form stiffened and straightened. Then it was shaken by a prolonged ague. He stared into space. To the two watchers, there was a curious and profound dignity in the firm lines of his awful face. He was invaded by a creeping strangeness that slowly enveloped him. For a moment, the tremor of his legs caused him to dance a sort of hideous hornpipe. His arms beat wildly about his head, an expression of imp-like enthusiasm. His tall figure stretched itself to its full height. There was a slight rending sound. Then it began to swing forward, slow and straight, in the manner of a falling tree. A swift, muscular contortion made the left shoulder strike the ground first. The body seemed to bounce a little way from the earth. "God," said the tattered soldier. The youth had watched, spellbound, this ceremony at the place of meeting. His face had been twisted into an expression of every agony he had imagined for his friend. He now sprang to his feet and, going closer, gazed upon the paste-like face. The mouth was open and the teeth showed in a laugh. As the flap of the blue jacket fell away from the body, he could see that the side looked as if it had been chewed by wolves. The youth turned with sudden, livid rage toward the battlefield. He shook his fist. He seemed about to deliver a philippic. "Hell!" The red sun was pasted in the sky like a wafer. Chapter 10. The tattered man stood musing. "Well, he was a reg'lar Jim Dandy for nerve, wa'n't he?" said he finally in a little awestruck voice. "A reg'lar Jim Dandy." He thoughtfully poked one of the docile hands with his foot. "I wonder where he got his strength from. I never seen a man do like that before. It was a funny thing. Well, he was a regular Jim Dandy." The youth desired to screech out his grief. He was stabbed, but his tongue lay dead in the tomb of his mouth. He threw himself again upon the ground and began to brood. The tattered man stood musing. "Look-a-here, pardner," he said after a time. He regarded the corpse as he spoke. "He's up and gone, ain't he, and we might as well begin to look out for old number one. This here thing is all over. He's up and gone, ain't he? And he's all right here. Nobody won't bother him. And I must say I ain't enjoying any great health myself these days." The youth, awakened by the tattered soldier's tone, looked quickly up. He saw that he was swinging uncertainly on his legs and that his face had turned to a shade of blue. "Good Lord," he cried. "You ain't going to— Not you, too." The tattered man waved his hand. "Nary die," he said. "All I want is some pea soup and a good bed." "Some pea soup," he repeated dreamfully. The youth arose from the ground. "I wonder where he came from. I left him over there." He pointed. "And now I find him here. And he was coming from over there, too." He indicated a new direction. They both turned toward the body as if to ask of it a question. "Well," at length spoke the tattered man, "there ain't no use in our staying here and trying to ask him anything." The youth nodded an assent wearily. They both turned to gaze for a moment at the corpse. The youth murmured something. "Well, he was a Jim Dandy, wa'n't he?" said the tattered man as if in response. They turned their backs upon it and started away. For a time they stole softly, treading with their toes. It remained laughing there in the grass. "I'm commencing to feel pretty bad," said the tattered man, suddenly breaking one of his little silences. "I'm commencing to feel pretty damn bad." The youth groaned. Oh, Lord! He wondered if he was to be the tortured witness of another grim encounter. But his companion waved his hand reassuringly. "Oh, I'm not going to die yit. They're too much dependent on me for me to die yit. No, sir, nary die. I can't. You'd ought to see the swad of children I've got and all like that." The youth, glancing at his companion, could see by the shadow of a smile that he was making some kind of fun. As they plodded on, the tattered soldier continued to talk. "Besides, if I died, I wouldn't die the way that feller did. That was the funniest thing. I'd just flop down, I would. I never seen a feller die the way that feller did. You know Tom Jameson? He lives next door to me up home. He's a nice feller, he is, and we was all as good friends. Smart, too. Smart as a steel trap. Well, when we was a-fightin' this afternoon, all of a sudden he began to rip up and cuss and beller at me. "You're shot, ye blamed infernal." He swear horrible. He siz to me. I put up min hand to my head, and when I looked at my fingers, I seen, sure enough, I was shot. I give a holler and begin to run, but before I could get away, another one hit me in the arm and whirl me clean round. I got skeered when they was all a-shootin' behind me, and I run to beat all, but I cotch it pretty bad. I've an idea I'd have been fightin' yit if 'twasn't for Tom Jameson. Then he made a calm announcement. There's 2 of 'em, little ones, but they're beginning to have fun with me now. I don't believe I can walk much furder. They went slowly on in silence. "You look pretty peaked yourself," said the tattered man at last. "I bet you've got a worser one than you think. You'd better take keer of your hurt. It don't do to let sech things go. It might be inside mostly, and them plays thunder. Where is it located?" But he continued his harangue without waiting for a reply. "I see a feller get hit plumb in the head when my reg'ment was a-standin' at ease onct, and everybody yelled to him, 'Hurt, John? Are you hurt much?' 'No,' says he. He looked kinder surprised, and he went on tellin' him how he felt. He seed he didn't feel nothin'. But by dad, the first thing that feller knowed, he was dead. Yes, he was dead. Stone dead. So, you want to watch out. You might have some queer kind to hurt yourself. You can't never tell. Where is yourn located?" The youth had been wriggling since the introduction of this topic. He now gave a cry of exasperation and made a furious motion with his hand. "Oh, don't bother me," he said. He was enraged against the tattered man and could have strangled him. His companions seemed ever to play intolerable parts. They were ever upraising the ghost of shame on the stick of their curiosity. He turned toward the tattered man as one at bay. "Now, don't bother me," he repeated with desperate menace. "Well, Lord knows I don't want to bother anybody," said the other. There was a little accent of despair in his voice as he replied, "Lord knows I've got enough moan to tend to." The youth, who had been holding a bitter debate with himself and casting glances of hatred and contempt at the tattered man, here spoke in a hard voice. "Goodbye," he said. The tattered man looked at him in gaping amazement. Why, pardner, where ye goin'?" he asked unsteadily. The youth, looking at him, could see that he too, like that other one, was beginning to act dumb and animal-like. His thoughts seemed to be floundering about in his head. Now, look, here, you Tom Jameson, now, I won't have this here won't do. Where you goin'?" The youth pointed vaguely. "Over there," he replied. "Well, now look, here, now," said the tattered man, rambling on in idiot fashion. His head was hanging forward and his words were slurred. "This thing won't do now, Tom Jameson. It won't do. I know you pig-headed devil. You want to go tromping off with a bad hurt. It ain't right. Now, Tom Jameson, it ain't. You want to leave me take keer of ye, Tom Jameson. It ain't, right? It ain't for ye to go, tromping off, with a bad hurt. It ain't right. It ain't." In reply, the youth climbed a fence and started away. He could hear the tattered man bleating plaintively. Once he faced about angrily. "What? Look, here, now, Tom Jameson, now, it ain't—" The youth went on. Turning at a distance, he saw the tattered man wandering about helplessly in the field. He now thought that he wished he was dead. He believed he envied those men whose bodies lay strewn over the grass of the fields and on the fallen leaves of the forest. The simple questions of the tattered man had been knife thrusts to him. They asserted a society that probes pitilessly at secrets until all is apparent. His late companion's chance persistency made him feel that he could not keep his crime concealed in his bosom. It was sure to be brought plain by one of those arrows which cloud the air and are constantly pricking, discovering, proclaiming those things which are willed to be forever hidden. He admitted that he could not defend himself against this agency. It was not within the power of vigilance. Chapter 11. He became aware that the furnace roar of the battle was growing louder. Great blown clouds had floated to the still heights of air before him. The noise, too, was approaching. The woods filtered men, and the fields became dotted. As he rounded a hillock, he perceived that the roadway was now a crying mass of wagons, teams, and men. From the heaving tangle issued exhortations, commands, imprecations. Fear was sweeping it all along. The cracking whips bit and horses plunged and tugged. The white-topped wagons strained and stumbled in their exertions like fat sheep. The youth felt comforted in a measure by this sight. They were all retreating. Perhaps, then, he was not so bad after all. He seated himself and watched the terror-stricken wagons. They fled like soft, ungainly animals. All the roars and lashers served to help him to magnify the dangers and horrors of the engagement, that he might try to prove to himself that the thing with which men could charge him was in truth a symmetrical act. There was an amount of pleasure to him in watching the wild march of this vindication. Presently, the calm head of a forward-going column of infantry appeared in the road. It came swiftly on. Avoiding the obstructions gave it the sinuous movement of a serpent. The men at the head butted mules with their musket stocks. They prodded teamsters indifferent to all howls. The men forced their way through parts of the dense mass by strength. The blunt head of the column pushed. The raving teamsters swore many strange oaths. The commands to make way had the ring of a great importance in them. The men were going forward to the heart of the din. They were to confront the eager rush of the enemy. They felt the pride of their onward movement when the remainder of the army seemed trying to dribble down this road. They tumbled teams about with a fine feeling that it was no matter so long as their column got to the front in time. This importance made their faces grave and stern, and the backs of the officers were very rigid. As the youth looked at them, the black weight of his woe returned to him. He felt that he was regarding a procession of chosen beings. The separation was as great to him as if they had marched with weapons of flame and banners of sunlight. He could never be like them. He could have wept in his longings. He searched about in his mind for an adequate malediction for the indefinite cause, the thing upon which men turn the words of final blame. It, whatever it was responsible for him, he said. There lay the fault. The haste of the column to reach the battle seemed to the forlorn young man to be something much finer than stout fighting. Heroes, he thought, could find excuses in that long, seething lane. They could retire with perfect self-respect and make excuses to the stars. He wondered what those men had eaten that they could be in such haste to force their way to grim chances of death. As he watched, his envy grew until he thought that he wished to change lives with one of them. He would have liked to have used a tremendous force, he said, throw off himself and become a better. Swift pictures of himself, apart, yet in himself, came to him. A blue, desperate figure leading lurid charges with one knee forward and a broken blade high. A blue, determined figure standing before a crimson and steel assault, getting calmly killed on a high place before the eyes of all. He thought of the magnificent pathos of his dead body. These thoughts uplifted him. He felt the quiver of war desire. In his ears, he heard the ring of victory. He knew the frenzy of a rapid, successful charge. The music of the trampling feet, the sharp voices, the clanking arms of the column near him made him soar on the red wings of war. For a few moments he was sublime. He thought that he was about to start for the front. Indeed, he saw a picture of himself, dust-stained, haggard, panting, flying to the front at the proper moment to seize and throttle the dark, leering witch of calamity. Then the difficulties of the thing began to drag at him. He hesitated, balancing awkwardly on one foot. He had no rifle. He could not fight with his hands, said he resentfully to his plan. Well, rifles could be had for the picking. They were extraordinarily profuse. Also, he continued, it would be a miracle if he found his regiment. Well, he could fight with any regiment. He started forward slowly. He stepped as if he expected to tread upon some explosive thing. Doubts and he were struggling. He would truly be a worm if any of his comrades should see him returning thus, the marks of his flight upon him. There was a reply that the intent fighters did not care for what happened rearward, saving that no hostile bayonets appeared there. In the battle blur, his face would, in a way, be hidden, like the face of a cowled man. But then he said that his tireless fate would bring forth, when the strife lulled for a moment, a man to ask of him an explanation. In imagination, he felt the scrutiny of his companions as he painfully labored through some lies. Eventually, his courage expended itself upon these objections. The debates drained him of his fire. He was not cast down by this defeat of his plan, for upon studying the affair carefully, he could not but admit that the objections were very formidable. Furthermore, various ailments had begun to cry out. In their presence, he could not persist in flying high with the wings of war. They rendered it almost impossible for him to see himself in a heroic light. He tumbled headlong. He discovered that he had a scorching thirst. His face was so dry and grimy that he thought he could feel his skin crackle. Each bone of his body had an ache in it, and seemingly threatened to break with each movement. His feet were like two sores. Also, his body was calling for food. It was more powerful than a direct hunger. There was a dull, weight-like feeling in his stomach, and when he tried to walk, his head swayed and he tottered. He could not see with distinctness. Small patches of green mist floated before his vision. While he had been tossed by many emotions, he had not been aware of ailments. Now they beset him and made clamor. As he was at last compelled to pay attention to them, his capacity for self-hate was multiplied. In despair, he declared that he was not like those others. He now conceded it to be impossible that he should ever become a hero. He was a craven loon. Those pictures of glory were piteous things. He groaned from his heart and went staggering off. A certain moth-like quality within him kept him in the vicinity of the battle. He had a great desire to see and to get news. He wished to know who was winning. He told himself that despite his unprecedented suffering, he had never lost his greed for a victory. Yet, he said, in a half-apologetic manner to his conscience, he could not but know that a defeat for the army this time might mean many favorable things for him. The blows of the enemy would splinter regiments into fragments. Thus, many men of courage, he considered, would be obliged to desert the colors and scurry like chickens. He would appear as one of them. They would be sullen brothers in distress, and he could then easily believe he had not run any farther or faster than they. And if he himself could believe in his virtuous perfection, he conceived that there would be small trouble in convincing all others. He said, as if in excuse for this hope, that previously the army had encountered great defeats and in a few months had shaken off all blood and tradition of them, emerging as bright and valiant as a new one, thrusting out of sight the memory of disaster and appearing with the valor and confidence of unconquered legions. The shrilling voices of the people at home would pipe dismally for a time, but various generals were usually compelled to listen to these ditties. He, of course, felt no compunctions for proposing a general as a sacrifice. He could not tell who the chosen for the barbs might be, so he could center no direct sympathy upon him. The people were afar, and he did not conceive public opinion to be accurate at long range. It was quite probable they would hit the wrong man who, after he had recovered from his amazement, would perhaps spend the rest of his days in writing replies to the songs of his alleged failure. It would be very unfortunate, no doubt, but in this case a general was of no consequence to the youth. In a defeat, there would be a roundabout vindication of himself. He thought it would prove, in a manner, that he had fled early because of his superior powers of perception. A serious prophet upon predicting a flood should be the first man to climb a tree. This would demonstrate that he was indeed a seer. A moral vindication was regarded by the youth as a very important thing. Without salve, he could not, he thought, wear the sore badge of his dishonor through life. With his heart continually assuring him that he was despicable, he could not exist without making it, through his actions, apparent to all men. If the army had gone gloriously on, he would be lost. If the din meant that now his army's flags were tilted forward, he was a condemned wretch. he would be compelled to doom himself to isolation. If the men were advancing, their indifferent feet were trampling upon his chances for a successful life. As these thoughts went rapidly through his mind, he turned upon them and tried to thrust them away. He denounced himself as a villain. He said that he was the most unutterably selfish man in existence. His mind pictured the soldiers who would place their defiant bodies before the spear of the yelling battle fiend, and as he saw their dripping corpses on an imagined field, he said that he was their murderer. Again, he thought that he wished he was dead. He believed that he envied a corpse. Thinking of the slain, he achieved a great contempt for some of them, as if they were guilty for thus becoming lifeless. They might have been killed by lucky chances, he said, before they had had opportunities to flee or before they had been really tested. Yet they would receive laurels from tradition. He cried out bitterly that their crowns were stolen and their robes of glorious memories were shams. However, he still said that it was a great pity he was not as they. A defeat of the army had suggested itself to him as a means of escape from the consequences of his fall. He considered now, however, that it was useless to think of such a possibility. His education had been that success for that mighty blue machine was certain, that it would make victories as a contrivance turns out buttons. He presently discarded all his speculations in the other direction. He returned to the creed of soldiers. When he perceived again that it was not possible for the army to be defeated, he tried to bethink him of a fine tale which he could take back to his regiment, and with it turn the expected shafts of derision. But as he mortally feared these shafts, it became impossible for him to invent a tale he felt he could trust. He experimented with many schemes, but threw them aside one by one as flimsy. He was quick to see vulnerable places in them all. Furthermore, he was much afraid that some arrow of scorn might lay him mentally low before he could raise his protecting tale. He imagined the whole regiment saying, "Where's Henry Fleming? He run, didn't he? Oh my." He recalled various persons who would be quite sure to leave him no peace about it. They would doubtless question him with sneers and laugh at his stammering hesitation. In the next engagement, they would try to keep watch of him to discover when he would run. Wherever he went in camp, he would encounter insolent and lingeringly cruel stares. As he imagined himself passing near a crowd of comrades, he could hear one say, "There he goes." Then, as if the heads were moved by one muscle, all the faces were turned toward him with wide, derisive grins. He seemed to hear someone make a humorous remark in a low tone. At it, the others all crowed and cackled. He was a slang phrase. This concludes the fourth part of 8 total of The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.